could call me on my cell phone.
What's going on, everyone? It's your favorite dwarf, Natsu Dragneel from the Fairy Tale Guild. Just kidding, but I want to kick things off by thanking my 11 subscribers. One more and we're just like Jesus. Also, just kidding. Today I wanted to talk about Fairy Tale, which is a very interesting and well-positioned deck in the current format. I do admit that I was wrong in my last video where I talked about a shifter format and a turn skip format. It seemed to be that the NAWCQ was just the opposite of that. Now, this deck might look familiar. It was well represented, but it was also the winner of the Farfa Genesys tournament. It is card for card, main deck and extra the same. The only thing that's unique is the side deck. There's a couple things I want to talk about there. Why didn't I make any tweaks to either the main or the extra? Given the ratios in the assortment of hand traps in non-engine that we're playing, there wasn't really much I wanted to change with it, and the more I played around with it, the more and more I liked the deck. So shout out to, I think it was Albert is their name, so shout out to you for the deck list, but without further ado, let's get into it. To kick today's discussion off, we're going to start with Fairy Tale Luna, one of the OG fairy tales from a couple of years ago. This one on normal summon adds an 1850 attack monster, not just a fairy tale, any 1850 attack monster. And it has a quick effect to target a monster on the field. The opposing player can negate the effect by sending a monster with the same name from deck to grave. And if they do, they can negate the effect, otherwise both monsters are returned to the hand. This card has aged very well over the last couple of years. It has a very strong ability to go both first and second, and the new support cards help facilitate that. The next monster we have here is Fairy Tale Machgiru. It is a 2-of in this deck. It reads, if a spellcaster monster with 1850 attack is on the field, you can special summon it from hand or grave. It's important to note that I can summon from grave as well. And if it's normal or special summon, you can add one Fairy Tale spell or trap or Fairy Tale Tales from deck to hand. Its final effect is an ignition effect. You can pay 500 life points. The name of one effect monster your opponent controls becomes the Prince of Fairies. This is not a quick effect. I feel like it would be busted if it was. But it's a very strong effect nonetheless. This card kind of does everything to facilitate your game plan. It puts another 4-star monster on the board to make our Xyz monster. It adds a Fairy Tale spell or trap from deck to hand to get our plays going. And if you do decide to change the name of a monster on the field, you can use Super Poly to then fuse it away. So all in all, very strong. You could play a third. I kind of like the 2-of in this deck. You can also recur it off the quick play spell that it can add to special summon it from banished anyways. So again, I'm good with 2. Next up is Genia of the Ring. This is actually not a Fairy Tale monster. That's it for the main deck Fairy Tale monsters. We can't afford to fit Snow in here. I think it's 80 to 85 points anyways. Genia of the Ring came out in Blazing Dominion. It simply reads, if it's in your hand, you could target one face-up monster on the field. Special summon this card. Also, that target becomes a spellcaster monster. The next time it would be destroyed by a card effect this turn, it is not. Also, you can't special summon from the extra, except spellcasters. That lock is not relevant to our deck list other than I think like Exciton Knight, but typically you're making that early anyways, so that lock wouldn't conflict. Its final effect is if it's tributed or banished to activate a spellcaster monster's effect, you can add back to hand. So you could tell that this card is only really going to be banished off Snow, which we're not playing, and you're not really going to be tributing any monsters, so not really a relevant effect, but definitely a secret one to make note of. I'm comfortable playing only 2. I think with the 1850 attack stat, that makes it extremely searchable off Luna. It's fine where it is. Speaking of the 1850 stat, I felt that it was important to take a look at a couple of the monsters that have that same 1850 attack stat. There's really nothing interesting or specific that you'd like to see. A lot of the Charmer monsters, this Gilta monster is actually kind of funny. I just read it for the first time. But the Hecahan's Mankukeeble, I don't know how to pronounce that. Definitely butchered it. But has an 1850 attack stat that you might be able to take advantage of. Curious if that is something that exists, but I'm not really sure. The next card I want to talk about is Regulus, the Prince of Endymion. This card's really strong. It's an extender. It's a 1-card rank 4 if you open it specifically, and adds a spell that provides you with destruction protection. It simply reads, if it's in your hand, you can reveal one other spellcaster monster, lose life points equal to the reveal monster's level times 300, and if you do special summon this card. If the card is special summon, you can add one spell that mentions Regulus, Prince of Endymion from deck to hand. So with that, let's just skip straight to the Empire of Endymion. When it's activated, you can add one Regulus from deck to hand, and then if your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon one spellcaster monster from your hand. So it's pretty solid going second. You can also special one Regulus, then add the other Regulus, normal summon it, and that's an instant rank 4. You could make Exciton Knight, or your Fairy Tale, Xyz monster, whatever route you want to take. If a card you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you could destroy one Regulus, the Prince of Endymion, in your hand or face-up field instead. You can only use each effect per turn, you can only activate one per turn. Opening this card can be tough because you can add the first Regulus, but you can't get access to the second one to make a Reg Force, so you kind of have to rely on having another monster in your hand. Nonetheless, it's still good. It's really good going first because you can put one Regulus on the board, keep one in hand, and then you can insulate yourself from destruction. Not much more to talk about with that card. The Vere cards are not out, so not even going to bother talking about them. I actually don't even know what they do if they're not out. It's just not something that's of concern to me right now. Next up is Crowley, the Gifted Magistus. This is an adjacent monster to the Alistair archetype, whatever you want to call it. If it's added from deck to hand, which we're not doing, but I wanted to note it's similar to the Poplar effect. It will special summon itself, and then when it's normal or special summoned, you can fusion summon one Magistus or invoked fusion monster from extra using monsters from your hand or field as material. Now, how are we doing that? Typically, the last play we want to make is with 2 level 4 bodies, 2 spellcasters with different attributes specifically. This Riliona here can special summon one Magistus monster from deck, that being the Crowley, and then you can use both that monster and the Crowley as fusion material to make the Zoroa, and the Zoroa is an Omni Negate. Again, it has to be your last play because this Riliona Xyz monster does lock you into the Magistus archetype specifically. Continuing with the Spellcaster Slop, next up we have Emilia, Dance Princess of Nekroz. I want to talk about this card alongside the Advanced Swordsman of Nekroz. Why? Because the Swordsman is a normal summon that special summons Emilia from deck, and when Emilia is special summoned, you can add a Nekroz ritual monster from deck to hand. Now, why is this so good? Because they are both level 4 spellcaster monsters. That allows you to make the new Fairy Tale Xyz monster. Emilia is also an extender, so if you open one and then you're specialing the other from deck, it's still fine because Emilia can special summon itself as long as you have a warrior Nekroz monster on your field or graveyard. So just more level 4 spellcaster monsters to play around with. We do play the 3 Brionac and the 1 Cataster. Now, why do we play these 4 ritual monsters? Well, Brio searches any of our Nekroz monsters from deck to hand, not specifically, 100% of the time we're searching Advance unless it's already in our hand, then we search the Emilia. The Emilia can then get us access to the Cataster, which is a discard to special summon a Nekroz monster from graveyard. Obviously, you can't special summon the Brio because it wasn't summoned properly, but you can summon another level 4 spellcaster monster to keep your rank 4 players going. So that rounds out our first 18 monsters of the deck that would contribute to the Fairy Tale Spellcaster Slop theme that we're going for. The goal with these 18 monsters is to put up the Omni Negate at the end of our combo with the Zoroa. We can make the Alchemic Magician, which requires 3 level 4 spellcaster monsters. During the end phase, you can discard a card from hand and attach a material to then set any spell from deck to the field. So specifically, we're going to set a quick play spell, that being Super Polymerization, because it has such great synergy in this deck. But you'll notice in the side deck, I also have a card like Silent Graveyard that can just completely floodgate your opponent in the following turn. Now, Silent Graveyard doesn't cover everything. We can take a look at a few quick play spells here just to talk about what that card has the potential to set. Spellbound is one of them, preventing your opponent from using face-up monsters they control as tribute fodder or anything from the extra deck. Mischief of the Wolves, very similar to Mischief of the Gnomes. You will be reducing the levels of monsters your opponent controls by 2, increasing the level of your monsters by 2. That does kind of hurt us. This card isn't also the greatest into the current meta, with Blitzclick probably being the best deck and not really going into the extra deck. I felt that this card wasn't super necessary to include, but definitely something to think about in future formats. Probably my least favorite card in this format, this stupid Pear Bear Scare card that you kind of have to have, kind of don't. But it is a quick play spell you can set if you choose. Also, I like including one in the side because so many people are on it. You can then move it to the main deck if you feel you need to do so. A couple of other cards to know. I like looking up cards that say neither player can or your opponent cannot or negate the effects. Xyz Encore is a great example. Mistaken Arrest, I believe, could be worth the 10 points. I think I did see it in one of the NAWCQ deck lists, so definitely something to think about. The rest of these, I'm not sure, but these 3 are probably the primary 3 targets. You could also just set something like Chalice. There's one in the main deck. If you're low on cards in hand, this might be a better set, so something to think about. And then the final card, Book of Eclipse, is obviously an incredibly powerful card. I don't think it fits well into this deck specifically because you're trying to do a lot of fusing, but again, another card to think about. I would just search quick play spells and then just read through them. I know it could be kind of tedious, but just do it. But nonetheless, let's get into the hand trap lineup. We have 10 here. We have 2 Ogre, 3 Crow, 2 Perulia, 2 Fua, and the 1 Nibiru. My personal feeling is that if you're going to play the Charmies, it is almost always worth it to play at least the 1 Nibiru. Why? I think you kind of want that threat to leverage against your opponent. Also, if they see it game 1, they might not know how many you're on, so it's always something to your advantage. The 3DD Crow for generic graveyard hate, I think 1 point is perfect for this card. I know people have had the debate on 0 versus 1 for this. If it was at 0, I feel like everyone would be playing it, even if it wasn't amazing in the current format. However, looking at the best deck in the format, that being Blitzclick, I don't know how good Crow is into that deck specifically. However, I don't know what other 3 hand traps I would slot in here. Maybe you play something like more Engine, maybe you play the extra Machigiru, something to think about, but I have the 3 Crow there for now. The Charmies, I know I touched on them alongside Nibiru. I think 2 and 2 is perfect. Especially where you drop Perulia and Fu, it puts your opponent in a really awkward position where are they going to normal from hand? Are they going to make something from extra? Usually you end up getting 2 to 3 draws out of this at the bare minimum. I really like the ratio of 2 and 2. And then the Ogre, that is specific to Blitzclick. I think playing 2 is just fine, especially if you're going to play that many Charmies. You'll see that Ogre, a few more times going second. And with that, let's get into the spell cards of the deck. The Fairy Tale Ball. This field spell kind of just does everything you want the Fairy Tale deck to do. When this card is activated, you can add 1 Fairy Tale monster or 1 Fairy Tale Tales from your deck or banishment to your hand. Fairy Tale Tales, if you don't know, is the continuous spell that I believe released a few years ago in Ghosts from the Past. This card, I think, is a little bit more win more, because it requires you to have a spellcaster monster with 1850 attack in your hand to do something. The final part of this card that talks about battle and effect damage is irrelevant, especially with the Teller fusion monster that prevents your Fairy Tale monsters from being destroyed by battle anyways. You could just summon everything in defense mode. And I want you to keep defense mode at top of mind. We're going to talk about that when we get to the side deck here in a few minutes. But back to the field spell. Once per turn, if your opponent special summons a monster and you control a Fairy Tale monster, you can target 1 effect monster your opponent controls, negate its effects, and its name becomes Prince of Fairies. This card is just extremely good negation power, changing your opponent's monsters' names, because then you can use Super Poly more effectively. Pretty much every time you are adding this card from deck to hand off the Machigiru, unless you already have it, then you would add the Once Upon a Fairy Tale. Now, how do you get to the Machigiru field spell combo efficiently? That's going to be through your level 4, rank 4 spellcaster engine. That makes the Wickcat. The Wickcat will then dump 2 Fairy Tale cards from deck to grave. Most of the time you're dumping the Machigiru if you don't have access to it already, because you can then special summon it from the graveyard because the Wickcat has 1850 attack. Next up is Tales of the Fairy Tales. This is the other card that you're typically dumping off Wickcat. Why? Because you can equip it from your graveyard to a monster you control, a Fairy Tale monster, and then you can immediately after that effect resolves normal summon a spellcaster monster with 1850 attack. So you could hypothetically normal summon Luna twice per turn with this deck's engine. Now, why is this good? Because Luna's effect when normal summon is not once per turn. Obviously, with normal summoning, it's only intended to be once per turn anyways. So theoretically, you can normal summon the Luna, do a little bit of combo, add another Luna, normal summon it using the equip spell's effect, and then you can add Ginny of the Ring. So it just gives you more level 4s to play around with. Now for the preceding effect, the equip effect here allows you to fusion summon a spellcaster fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand, field, and or Prince of Fairies your opponent controls as material. Now this is an equip spell, not a quick play spell, so you have to ignition use this effect, so it's kind of difficult to use monsters your opponent controls unless you have the field spell up and they are actively special summoning monsters. Most of the time off this fusion effect, I'm summoning the Weaver. The Weaver allows you to special summon a Fairy Tale monster from deck or banishment, so that gives you another level 4 to play around with. It also has a different attribute that's not light, that helps you make the Aureliona if necessary. Next up is the quick play spell Once Upon a Fairy Tale. This card is also another card that you would dump off the Wickcat. When it's sent from deck to grave or it's banished, you can reset it. Usually you're only doing that if you have both equip spells in hand or you already have Machigiru access. You could just do it for fun. But I do like adding it off Machigiru sometimes because it helps you extend even further. Nevertheless, what does this card do? It special summons up to 1 light Fairy Tale monster from each your hand, graveyard, or banishment. Hypothetically, you could summon 3. More often than not, you're summoning 1 to 2. Keep in mind it requires the monster special summon to be light Fairy Tale monsters. you cannot special summon either of the fusion monsters because they are Earth. It does lock you into spellcaster monsters, but that just doesn't matter. And then the effect I mentioned before, if it's sent to grave or banished other than from field, you can set it from either position to your field. Cannot be activated. Make note of that as well, unless you control a spellcaster monster. Sorry, wrong again. Fairy Tale monster, close enough. Moving on. We'll skip Empire of Endymion, don't need to talk about that. Metamorphosis. I really like one of this card in the deck. Why? Because you can turn a Charmy into like half combo. I think more than one would be a little excessive. You'd be relying on yourself to like brick more, or your opponent interrupting you during your combo, which isn't as common in Genesys format. I know I say that with a deck full of hand traps, but nonetheless, it is true. And I forgot to mention which monsters you're summoning off this card. It's either going to be the Teller or the Weaver. Typically, Weaver is the better one because it special summons a Fairy Tale from deck. You can special summon the Machgiru and then continue your combo from there. Next up is the 3 Super Polymerization at 13 apiece, so that's 39 total points for 3 of these. It is absolutely worth it, especially being able to set it off the Alchemic Magician. If you already have it in your opening hand, you don't need to make that Magician. You can, go another route. You'll see in our extra deck here, we play a bunch of the targets, the Mud Dragon, the Garura, the Predaplant, and the Mixosa. This is a new card out of Chaos Origins. Also, like the Chorozo in some instances, but with the ability to turn your opponent's monsters into Prince of Fairies, you can do some interesting stuff, especially with these 2 monsters here. The Weaver of the Fairy Tales turns all Prince of Fairies monsters into spellcasters, which allows you to use them as material for the Teller. And if Teller is fusion summoned using the Prince of Fairies specifically, you can just nuke your entire board. This card's also an Omni Negate, so just the combination between these 2 and the Super Poly is very strong. I think it's too strong to play less than 3 of this, even with being able to set it off Alchemic Magician. With the final slot in that extra point, the Forbidden Chalice is thrown in here. I think, again, this is a fine target to set off the Alchemic Magician. It's a fine draw. You can use it going first and second. And if you see it off a Charmer, you can use it to bait an opponent's interaction. Now moving on to the extra deck. What's cool about this deck is I got to talk about a lot of the extra as I was talking about the main deck, so we'll be able to fly through this one a bit quicker. The Teller I mentioned has the ability to blow up your opponent's board. It's also an Omni Negate by banishing a Fairy Tale card, and it protects your Fairy Tale monsters from being destroyed from battle. This card is just way too good. Again, I want you to note the battle protection here. It's very important when we're going to talk about the side deck in a few minutes. Again, I mentioned a couple of these effects. The Prince of Fairies becoming spellcaster monsters, special summoning a Fairy Tale monster from deck or banishment. And then if you normal summon or special summon a non-Earth Fairy Tale monster, so it could be any of your main deck ones or the Wiccat that has an ability to special summon itself. You can target an effect monster your opponent controls, negate its effects, and its name becomes Prince of Fairies. Then it's totally up to you in terms of what you want to fuse into using your or your opponent's board. The Chorozo you could hard summon. I don't do that as much. I feel like usually I'm making this card to like clear room on my field, but if your opponent's monster declares an attack, you could target it, negate the attack, and then if you do, this card gains attack equals to its attack. And then you can return that monster on the field to the hand. So solid card. It is a tuner as well, so you could play the Magistus Synchro if you really wanted to. So this card is just a worse version of Exciton Knight with this build specifically because it's more steps to make this. This card is much more interesting. It is a floodgate depending on what you equip to it. Your opponent cannot special summon, or rather they cannot activate the effects of monsters with the same card type as the equipped Magistus card. So definitely something to think about. Again, the problem is the best deck right now, Blitzclick, doesn't really use the extra deck, so I'm good with skipping this for now, but definitely if something comes to be more of a tier 1, top tier 1, or tier 0 deck in Genesys format, could be something to look at. The Zoroa I talked about already in combination with the Rilliona is a monster negate. Also, the Rilliona allows it to ignition effect, negate the effects of a monster your opponent controls. So that effect is more relevant on the crackback on turn 3, but definitely something to note. It's kind of like a secret effect that most people wouldn't really think about. For our Super Volley targets, the Mud Dragon is the target protection, the Garura does the double damage and can also draw you a card. Predaplant is good, especially because Predaplant's a good deck, but the fusion monster and a dark monster is pretty easy to fuse into. The Mixosa is a nice easy one because it requires any monster type plus a spellcaster. So all 4 really solid choices here. I don't know if I'd add anything else specific in. Maybe depending on the format in the future, but I'm good with just these 4 for now. Now, this is the funny card, the Quintet Magician. How are you making this card? If you set Super Poly and then you use it, it's usually easiest to make the Mixosa. Then you can use the Mixosa quick effect to fusion summon a fusion monster from extra by banishing that card and monsters from field and graveyard specifically. Now, if you look at how many different spellcaster type monsters we're playing between the Luna, the Machgiru, the Jinia that you're pretty much always seeing, the Crowley that is very easy to get off the rank 4, and then one of the Regulus and Emilia, it's very common to be able to make this card. And especially with the fusion monsters too, they're also spellcasters. So you could just use this at the end of your main phase. This card is main phase only to just nuke your opponent's board. So you could potentially double nuke your opponent, again, which makes this deck so strong. Alchemic Magician, why are you $20? Why do you have 1 print? I don't know. I did spend it. However, it is a detached 1 discard card from hand to set a spell from deck during your end phase specifically. Do note that it doesn't just tutor a spell card. It also has an attack boosting effect, so just make note of that. It could be relevant and could come up if your opponent tries to attack over you. Exciton Knight, very easy to put level 4s on the board to make this monster, and then you can obviously board nuke your opponent. There's a lot of board nuking going on, but probably the best going second Xyz monster you could play. Rillione, we'll skip over this because we've talked about it so heavily already. The Wiccat, I probably should have started with this one because it's specific to Fairy Tail. However, we'll get into it now. I kind of alluded to it earlier. You can detach 2 materials from the card or up to and send the same number of Fairy Tail cards from deck to grave. Again, most of the time you're sending the Machgiru and the Tails, and if you already have access to one or the other, or you have both in hand, you just dump the Once Upon a Fairy Tale, at least in my opinion. The final effect here, you could target 1 Fairy Tale monster you control whose original attribute is light, special summon this card, and if you do, send that monster to the graveyard. That effect is really strong because when this card is on the field, your Fairy Tale monsters whose original attribute is light are now unaffected by your opponent's activated effects. So theoretically, if you had 1 Luna on the board and a Machgiru, or you had 2 Lunas on the board, whatever it may be, you could activate 1, let's say your opponent tries to like respond to it, then you can special summon or activate the effect of Wiccat in graveyard to then special summon it, and then your Luna would be unaffected and would resolve. It's also very important in combination with the Weaver, where when you special summon a Fairy Tail monster, you can turn one of your opponent's monsters into Prince of Fairies. That effect to turn your opponent's monsters into Prince of Fairies is not once per turn, just something to note. Now into the side deck. Much less theory this time, very straightforward. The only thing that's theory are a couple of the traps and then the Silent Graveyard, which I kind of talked about already, or insert any other strong quick play spell here. Nevertheless, I have the 3 Kaiju. I just think the ability to tribute anything and anything that's unaffected specifically is very strong. And then the 1 Slumber. There are times where I see more than one of this and then I just get really frustrated, and I had 1 slot. So I was like, let's just throw in the Slumber. It's something to think about and you could play around with. The 3 Twin Twisters, you could also play the MST if you like want to set this off the Alchemic Magician, you can, but I feel that this card is better into specific matchups again, like Blitzclick that's putting up a trap and a set card. I think it's important to be able to at least target 2 of them rather than just trading the 1-for-1. Especially with Machgiru in the deck, you could pitch it off the Twin Twisters and then summon the Machgiru if you summon with something with 1850 attack. So it's really strong in combination with that specifically. Just something to think about. I kind of like Twin Twisters slated here. Mask of Restrict is probably my favorite going first side card because it just insulates your board to the next level, especially with the destruction protection we have. I feel like this card was better positioned in previous metas where there were decks that were tributing monsters left and right, but when you do come across that deck that does tribute monsters, it's an even better card. I'm going to slot it here for now. You could kind of play around with the ratios with another card that I'm going to talk about next, but I like it at 3. I'm going to play it here. And that card that I would think about playing more of over the Mask of Restrict is probably the Unbreakable Xyz Barrier, or playing something in combination with it, like another counter trap to further insulate your board. When a spell trap or monster effect is activated while you control an Xyz monster, You can negate the activation, detach 2 materials from a monster you control, and then destroy 1 card on the field. Now, the destruction effect here is optional. However, in combination with the Alchemic Magician, if you use its effect during your end phase, you're detaching a material from it. It will still have the 2 materials, so you could use that effect if you really wanted to. It pairs nicely with this card specifically, but more often than not, you're just using the counter trap effect to insulate your board to that next degree. Also once per turn, which is why I kind of like it better at 1, you could play it in combination with like a Dark Bribe, Debunk, you know, something that's good into the meta, but, you know, just something to think about. Now, a card that I found that I think is really good right now, at least. I don't know how well this will age or if this is a good take in general. This Scrum Force continuous trap card is from Dragons of Legend, I believe. It reads, while you control 2 or more face-up defense position monsters, your opponent cannot target defense position monsters you control with card effects, and they cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. It also says if this card would be destroyed by a card effect, you could destroy 1 card in your spell and trap card zone instead. Okay, so this card reads pretty interestingly. Now, you might be thinking, is this his Blitzclick tech? Kind of. Is Eye of Truth better? Yes, against that deck specifically. However, this has much more coverage. If your opponent is playing Blitzclick, they have to target another spell or trap you control, because if they target this card, you could just pop another card and that monster I don't believe would resolve, and they can't target any of your monsters if they're all in defense position. So it forces your opponent to play very oddly. If they're on Blitzclick, they can't target this card, they'd have to target another spell and trap, and if you have this card up in combination with the Empire of Endymion, they can't destroy the other spell trap card because you can use the protection effect of this instead. They can't target your monsters. So it's really funny. It forces them to play in a very methodical way, which you could plan for. However, it also has a wider reach because it just protects your monsters in general. It doesn't just prevent your opponent from revealing cards with this. Again, I like the cards that have a wider reach, and I think this trap is really strong. Now, you could be thinking, well, what if your opponent just runs over one of your defense position monsters? The Teller prevents that from happening. So at the end of the day, in combination with this, and this, there's a lot of protection going on, and it puts your opponent in a really, funky position that makes them think a little bit harder than usual, and usually more often than not, that leads to misplays. So I like this trap. It's funny. I'm going to try it out. If it ends up being bad, it is what it is. But again, I use the side deck as a tool to think, and I think that this card is pretty interesting. Another interesting card here is the Roka specifically. If it's normal, and especially with the ability to normal multiple times, you can pot a duality, and then your opponent chooses one of those cards to add to your hand. Again, because your opponent's doing that, I don't love this card. It is something to think about, though. Rella, the target protection. With Scrum Force, you definitely don't need this card, but I just don't feel like this card ever comes up or warrants putting in the side deck. Now, I screwed up with the replays. The first one I did, I made a misplay, so I had to redo it because it's on an auto sim. And then I got probably the best hand you could ever concoct. So without further ado, let's get into this replay here. So we're going to kick things off by pitching the Brio to add the advance. We always want to normal summon this first if we can. We will normal summon it, special the Amelia from deck. Use Amelia to add the Catastor to then extend from the graveyard. Make the Wicat, dump the Machgiru and the equip spell. Summon the Machgiru, grab the field spell because we don't have access to it. We will activate it to add the Luna. Activate the equip spell from graveyard to the Wicat to then normal summon the Luna. That'll get us the Ginia of the Ring. We will then activate the effect Diffuse to make the Weaver, especially another Machgiru from deck. We will then summon the Ginia by protecting the Luna. Summon the Amelia from grave, make the Alchemic Magician. We do have the Regulus in hand, so we can special that. Add the Empire of Endymion, which insulates us from destruction. Activate that to add another Regulus. Then we will special summon the Amelia because we have a Necros Warrior monster in graveyard. Make the Rilliona, summon the Crowley to make the Zoroa. Equip the Xyz monster, and then I will set the Super Poly in hand, and then set Chalice in the end phase. I want to note that I did that specifically because I already had access to Super Polymerization. Now, with the one card in hand being the Regulus, that would insulate us from destruction. Do I want to pitch that off Super Poly? Well, what you can do is you can preemptively use the Luna effect by turning one of your opponent's monsters into Prince of Fairies with either the Fusion or the Field spell. Use Luna's effect to bounce both because your opponent won't have another Prince of Fairies. Then you can Super Poly by discarding the Luna. So you would still have Regulus in hand if you need it. You could set another Super Poly, but I think that's just overkill at that point. So I think I'm comfortable with kind of what I just explained, the adding the Luna back to hand and then using that as the discard fodder. With that, that concludes today's deck discussion. If you haven't subscribed already, I would really appreciate it if you do so. I really enjoy talking about decks that I'm passionate about and something that you can kind of listen to, you know, while you're doing other things or to learn about another deck. But with that, this is Fairy Tale Snow. White. Peace.